As I got another rhyme, another rhythm for y'all to listen. I'm never quitting on my mission, I'ma roll with what I'm giving. Got some ambition, this new edition, filling positions. Looking at the void in myself and feeling what's missing. Better watch the way you going, better go in the right direction. In the moment you stressing, but you gon' be counting blessings. And I know that for certain, keep on working, open curtains. Haters swerving, cause they ain't ready for your final version. Whoa. I'm never gonna give up, fall down, I just gotta get up, yeah. Cause this is my road. Let's get action.
You're listening to the Tom Ficklin Show on WNHHLP 103.5 FM, your home for community radio.
Salutations, Connecticut. Salutations to the nation. Salutations to the world. We got a show for you today. But first, I need to thank Harry for being our engineer today. 103 FM New Haven for giving us this opportunity to talk truth to power. And I'm dedicating the show to Tom Ficklin, who I think I've done 20 something, maybe near 30 shows that Tom Ficklin has generously donated time so that we can talk about the real issues in education. And today I have a great guest, Dr. Christina Christian, and I'll allow her to introduce herself. But first, before we start the show, here's a little tip for you. So first of all, I take the cap, I turn it backwards. And why do I turn it backwards? Because I'm a man that goes against the wind. That's what you do over there. And then I want to share, I'm wearing my Amazing Grace tie. And what's important about that is some 40 years ago, my first Black teacher, Mrs. Stanfield, who came from North Carolina up to Jersey to teach us ghetto boys how to be decent young men. And when she found out I was going to be a teacher, because I was really a pretty big, stupid football player who thought the world ended in Friday night's parties. But I was a smart kid, and I tell people, I like to play it down. And she saw right through me. And when I was becoming a teacher and I was graduating, she sent me a gift of this Amazing Grace tie. And the history of Amazing Grace is Reverend Newton, the slave ship captain, who in the midst of this tossing tempest storm, thinks he's going to die, and he calls out to God, save me, send me your Amazing Grace. And he becomes a staunch abolitionist who inspires William Wilberforce, who fights a 20-year battle to end the slave trade in the United Kingdom. Oh yeah, it's a good one. So today, we're back there. I'm dedicating those things in there and let people know. And the interesting to why I tell that story is it just appears that for some reason, North Carolina teachers have an influence on my life. So, Christina, didn't you come up to Connecticut from North Carolina?
I did. And I think the interesting thing here, Jesse, is we left New Jersey and went to North Carolina. And now I hear you and I both meet in Connecticut. Isn't that something? Something. And you are certainly maybe that's why you're one of my favorite people. That's probably it. Yeah, you had someone from North Carolina pour into you. But yes, so I'm an assistant professor at Central Connecticut State University. Been here, this is my second time coming to Connecticut. The first time was over 30 years ago. I went back south to North Carolina and worked there in public schools for almost 30 years before coming back here and serving as a professor at the university. I work, my joy, what I love to do is prepare teachers for the classroom, and specifically preparing special education teachers for the classroom, which is, I think, preparing any teacher at this point. It's a tall order at this point. But special education is an unusually difficult task because there's just so many aspects of it that you have to know when you walk into the door. And you and I have talked about it, about the realities of right now. I'm not sure how many of the listeners have heard of DSAP, durational shortage. What was the A for? Can't remember the A.
Duration shortage.
Something. But basically it says that there's a critical shortage of special education teachers in the state. And actually that's truth across the nation, but there's a critical shortage. And as a result, Connecticut has created an opportunity for people to say, look, I want to sign up. I mean, I want to teach. And I want to teach children with disabilities. And as beautiful as that is, because I did it 30 years ago, it's you and I refer to it as boot camp because you're basically sending them in to work as teachers, but they don't have any of the credentials to work as teachers. They're learning and they're acquiring them as they go. The challenge is when you go into a classroom and you choose to work with the students who have the most difficulty learning, that's the student you're serving. You need something. You need a skill
something.
set. You need something.
If we thought about this boot camp, Dr. Charles Lowry, a retired math teacher from Harvard, a friend of mine, and
Yes.
he just turned 90, and we were celebrating his birthday a couple of weeks ago. And Dr. Charles used to say to me about DSAPs, because that was something that he did. He said, I'm also a Korean War veteran, Jesse, and our boot camp was before they dropped us in Korea. He said, we had a boot camp. This DSAP is the boot camp is dropping you in Korea in the middle of the battle. And so that we have to understand. One of the reasons I try to explain to people is that we are dropping our DSAP teachers in the most hazardous battle places, underfunded, under-resourced places in the world. And they're struggling to hold on. And if they hold on, they tend to be pretty good, but we lose a lot along the way because we didn't give them that artillery practice.
Right.
We told them, oh, here's a gun, jump in there, go fight, that kind of stuff. But yeah, that's the stuff. But I wanted to ask you specifically because especially special education teachers, they have this, and you've said it, you called it alphabet soup. I mean, and I always look at it, I look at it as, how do you do the smoke and mirrors to keep your mind off? We're not giving our poorest schools the resources and the funding they need. So you say UDL, CRT, MTSS, RTI, PBIS, SL, and we tell them this will save you.
Right.
So can you tell us what this alphabet soup and what the struggle is?
Yeah, one of the things you and I used to spend a couple of hours each week just talking about it, and I jokingly said there are too many letters in my alphabet soup. And you named them all. You rattled them off, and I'm sure your listeners are going, what? Basically, we've had all of these educational initiatives kind of hovering around the PBIS and RTI and see, all of these have sort of been a part of the conversation. But when COVID came and you had students out of school for, virtual school for about a year and a half, the academic deficits that they experienced were unprecedented. They had nationally, our students' reading and math scores plummeted to levels that they had never been. And so as a result, you had a collective of voices. You had parents, politicians, district personnel. Everybody had an opinion about how to make the changes. So everything that you just said, and I will not confuse the listeners by repeating all of these letters, but all of them really collectively, when you look at them, they were all designed to differentiate. And by differentiate, I mean, imagine as a parent, you have quadruplets, you have 4 babies, same age. And one day you decide to sit down and teach them all how to write their first and last name, because as parents, before you send them off to school, make sure they know how they know their name and their address. So you decide, let me sit down and teach them. Well, you have your first one who immediately does what you says, gets up and wants to play. You have your next 2 who are struggling just a little bit, They really need your help, so you can't take your eyes off of them because they're asking for help. Then you have the fourth one, who is somewhere crying because he can't even hold the pencil right. The pencil keeps slipping and falling. So you now have to try to figure out, how do I help the one who's already gone because he got it in length? And then I have the two here that have so many questions and need so much support. But then I have the one who's crying because he can't even get started. So take that as a parent, take that example of having quadruplets, multiply it times however many students are in the classroom. Because what teachers are being expected to do is to differentiate, which means every student in that class is going to be performing a little bit differently from the one beside them. But I don't care how different it is, you as that teacher have to be able to manage all of those students. So differentiation means you have to say, I know that all of my students have weaknesses and strengths. I know they have gifts and talents. They have preferences in how they learn. I've got to be that one person who choreographs for everybody. And so the same way that a parent would probably almost lose it trying to teach four children one thing, their name. Imagine being a teacher, having to teach reading and math and science and history to differentiate, to teach them from where they are. So all of those alphabets that you just mentioned are all a form of differentiation.
And we're doing it at a time when we have watched funding to our priority school districts, our poor school districts decline, and class sizes increase.
Yeah.
So I have special education teachers that are supposed to differentiate, and all of a sudden there's 15, there's 20, there's 25, there's 27 students in the class, and you can understand it's sort of like trying to take care of 27 people at one time. And now when we look at what the solution, and this is why I say against the wind cap. This is a state that has decided it is not responsible to give every child, every black and brown and every special education child, they are not responsible to give them a high quality and equal education. That's a Supreme Court decision, not from 1850, but from 2018. And that comes on. Now we have, and we're going to come to this because I think we called it Unpacking the Box. Actually, you gave us the title for it. So, but the solution Connecticut comes to, and I always think it's like smoke and mirror kinds of things to me, has been rather than to give teachers in our urban districts the resources and the funds they need to be successful, differentiate instruction, and to help all of their children, we decided to give them a box. So let's talk about $100 million for new reading curriculums, which when Rachel Gabrielle was here last time, she reminded us that two of them, according to the NYU rubric for culturally relevant curriculums, came out as being socially destructive to black and brown children. How that got on there, but anyway, let's talk about what does that mean if instead of the resources that you need to differentiate, I give you a curriculum in a box.
And the part that makes this really confusing is, I have to say, go back to all of those letters you rattled off. Since COVID, we have, in education, we have been on the receiving end of all of these ideas to change the trajectory that our students were on. Because remember, academically, deficits. But then you come in and have what you call, I think you consider the solution, but it's a reading program. And for those who don't understand what we mean when we say the box curriculum, because that's how we refer to it, because we as educators are deeply offended by this box. But when we say box, essentially what we're saying is there are reading programs that are out there that fall under this umbrella called science of reading. And for the layperson, basically, it's the mechanics of reading. Children have to learn the letter, and then they have to learn that the letter has a sound, and that the letters combine to make new sounds, and that these sounds make words, and then these words come together to make passages and mechanics. The problem is teachers are getting these boxes to teach the mechanics of reading. But when they use these boxes, they're not differentiating. Now, we're not even tapping into the issue that you just talked about, which was one of those alphabets. When you said CRT, culturally relevant pedagogy or teaching, that basically says that that book behind you with that beautiful little black doll, that book right there, children need to see that. They need to see themselves in these books. Well, when you open up, and can you imagine when children get to see something so beautiful as seeing themselves pictured in a book, that encourages them to want to read. So imagine pulling a box out of a story out of a box, and you, the teacher, are giving a script. You're saying, okay, children, A, can you say A? Can you say B? And you start there, and now granted, I don't have any problem with you starting there. But when that is the extent of the reading, when you don't give me, you can teach me how to read, but if you don't excite me about reading by allowing me to see the beautiful colors represented in the literature, then I'll maybe master the sounds and blending them, but I'll never really fully understand the excitement behind them if I don't see the beautiful colors represented in the books. And so that's the problem when we say opening up the box. It's a box that really is very scripted. So there's kind of this call and response the whole time. What joy, what possible joy can a child find in reading if that's the extent of it? I don't think they can find any. And that's the missing piece behind these boxes. You are robbing children of the joy of reading. And teachers are opening up the box and they're using it. But guess what? Even those boxes require you to differentiate. But so many teachers don't know that. They open up that box and they go through that script. And then they close the box at the end of those 15, 20 minutes and they move on to something else. But they don't use them to differentiate.
That if the audience may not be aware today, this has been a series this spring that we've been doing on literacy in Connecticut, but really it can be literacy anywhere USA because it's the same stuff. And Dr. Burrow Bailey, who was on the show, is an excellent person for professional development and advocate for culturally relevant teaching and diverse books and an unbelievable resource. And she travels throughout the country talking about that. And she said, I don't have a problem with the science of reading. I just want to know where the vocabulary and the comprehension is. And by the way, don't you understand, when do we start introducing those books that connect to children? And so, and that show, I think we had 5,000 views on Facebook from her, and that's the most any show I've ever had. People were listening to that, and then and she said, I want meaningful professional development for the science of reading, not this stuff about the box will fix all, or not that more why reading is phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. That's never been an argument, and I agree with her. I don't know any teachers that say I can teach you how to read without phonics. I don't really know any that have ever said that. Well, we're going to skip phonics today. We'll skip fluency. by the way, we don't need phonemic awareness. And also, I remind people there was a time we didn't need phonemic awareness. You and I have learned that way. Harry, our engineer, Tom Ficklin, the host, whose show we're on today, learned, and that was because we used to do things like skip to the loo, my darling,
Right.
hopscotch. We did nursery rhymes, and so we learned about rhyming and words and sounds. And all of a sudden, we're on these, and maybe COVID has helped. We're on these electronic devices, and I'm not playing hopscotch. I'm not playing Ring-a-Lario and kick the can. I'm not doing those things that taught Humpty Dumpty sat on the wall and had a great fall. You know, Jack and Jill went up the hill for a pail of water.
Right.
And you know, that kind of stuff. So that also, we were naturally giving people and it wasn't explicit. It was implicit instruction to become phonemically aware. And that was a pretty good foundation. And it didn't only happen in schools, it happened at home. But anyway, coming back to this component, no one is arguing about any of you know, what literacy, phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary. By the way, when you go into the secondary schools, the researchers like Pearson, David Pearson, will talk about vocabulary is 70% of comprehension. So it's like, you know, that counts. That counts. So, but let's come back to, I want to come back to this stuff that what's the problem in terms of, and it's not we're arguing against a view of literacy and you articulated that well just before, that we, of course we want you to learn the skills that make you literate, but what kinds of professional development do you imagine that would inspire teachers to be able to take that box or take that science of reading and somehow do what that little book and doll on the back shelf does over there? Because I can tell you for a fact, the first time I put that book and that doll out in our literacy center, a little 5-year-old black kindergarten girl ran in and grabbed the book. I mean, I was like, she almost knocked people over. Grabbed the doll and just over there and ran out and showed her mother and that kind of stuff. So, but and of course, that little girl's a reader now. So I would just tell you that.
And when I can't say enough, you and I and Dr. Bailey and probably so many others are on. I believe in the science of reading. I believe that you have to learn the phonics and the mechanics of the language. But when reading is reduced to the mechanics only, there's no joy in that. I mean, the books that I grew up on and the books that my husband and I raised our sons on, where there was plenty of rhyming and now I have to admit, it took a while for us when our sons were growing up to actually see a child of color in a book. When I saw a book that with a child of color on it, I bought it every time. I didn't care how much money I had or didn't have. I was going to get it because I knew the significance of seeing yourself in the literature. And you even said it before we came on air. You were talking about a little boy who the school thought he couldn't read. A little Spanish boy. They're thinking he can't read, but it took him sitting, listening to you and another reader read in Spanish. You had the English version of the text, the other reader had the Spanish version. And this little boy, you told the story how he clung to the words being read and how he inched closer and closer and closer to the book until he ended up reading it. So teachers who didn't think he could read, imagine that little boy sitting in a class with the science of reading where the only focus is the mechanics. How long would that little boy have been in that class, focused on the mechanics with teachers who didn't think he could read because he didn't see himself? When he finally saw himself and heard his own language in the book, that's when they found out, hey, he can actually read. How many little boys and girls do we have like that? Who you think they can't read? You think they don't know because you're focused so much on the mechanics that you never get a real book that represents the real students in your class. I know he can't be the only one.
Well, no, he's not the only one, and it's not only Spanish. It's Arabic, it's Hindi. It's so many languages that we come Sudanese and so many things. Our kids are coming to us in schools, speak multiple languages, and this is the trick with that young man. It's an urban district. Takes a long time. Every new student that comes into our schools from another country will get assessed,
Mhm.
not only in English, but also they'll use what we call the LAS, which is a literacy assessment, which can be done in other languages. And they'll assess that. But if you're in an urban district, what the public may not understand, where if I'm in, well, we're in the New Haven area, so if I'm down in Westfield or Madison, there's a affluent school district. Madison will do that very quickly, within weeks, because there's only a few students that fit that. And I'm not
Right.
saying it's small, but maybe out of 100 students, maybe 5 might need that kind of assessment.
Mhm.
But if I go to New Haven, I go to New Britain, I go to Bridgeport, I go to Hartford, we're talking about 70 out of 100.
Yeah.
And the districts are underfunded, under-resourced, and so that what happens is, and I'll lead this in because I think it's going to be a good topic for us. The students who need certain assessments and certain differentiation in poor districts, the cost and the timeline for doing that may not only take months, but could take years. So it could be years in the district of Bridgeport or Hartford before I'm diagnosed as a dyslexic reader.
Right.
Now,
Right.
if I am in Farmington, Simsbury, if I'm in those places, it will happen very quickly
Mhm.
because they have the resources. They have few students. So what I'm thinking, because now I want to argue, of course, like Dr. Bailey, like Dr. Gabrielle, when they're on the show, they say, let's have real PDs. Let's have meaningful PDs that the teachers need. Let's stop telling them that this is reading, you've been doing it wrong. Or and you usually say, why are you throwing out the baby with the bathwater? You know,
Yeah.
that kind of concept. But so the PD is important, but could we talk about your experience? Because you have worked with not only special education children, you
Mhm.
spent 20 something years
Yeah.
working with those students who struggles in
Yeah.
school. So is there a difference for those students who struggle and their parents and the teachers in those schools between very wealthy affluent school districts and very poor districts, whether it's in North Carolina, New
Mhm.
Jersey,
Mhm.
or Connecticut? Is there a
Mhm.
difference? Does that matter? If the resources, that's what I'm saying.
You know, the most critical resource of all, the large urban school districts are those school districts that have a need for teachers. Teachers don't stay long in those districts. They're trying to get to the affluent districts because there's a certain level of stability and calm. And to your point, you don't have the needs of the students aren't as great as they are in urban districts. So the biggest resource challenge that we have in school districts is those DSAP teachers that we were talking about, the ones that you hire, they raise their hand and say, I'll do it, and you put them in the classroom and they don't know the first thing about anything. They're in the urban school districts. So the reason why it takes so long to get children in the urban school districts on board is because the teachers who are least qualified are in those districts. And they have a high turnover rate. So when you take the main resource, we're not even talking about all of the extra fuzzy, cutesy stuff. We're talking about the main person sitting in the front of the classroom. That person in an urban school district is more likely to be the least qualified as compared to the affluent districts. So we have high turnover rate, we have the least qualified, And then you have the neediest. So you partner the least qualified with the neediest student. And so you see why it takes so long for those students to actually show any growth. They're in a school, not of their own doing. They didn't do anything wrong. They're showing up to school. They're doing whatever they need to do in the classroom, but you have the person at the front of the classroom who just they don't have the qualifications. And so you can't even blame the teacher. And so when we talk about professional development, it's a much bigger issue than that. I'm in a field, I actually was hired 30 years ago as a DSAP, if you will. I did figure out what the A was, area permit. Durational shortest area permit. And it's basically giving you a permit to act as a teacher, to take on the role of a teacher, even though you're not qualified. I did that 30 years ago. And I will tell you, it was a challenge over 30 years ago. It was a challenge. But I can't even imagine doing it now. I can't imagine it because back then we didn't have this alphabet soup that we have. We didn't have that. Even in special education, we didn't have this stuff. And so now you have teachers coming in at the most challenging time, period. And so unless you are really strategic about your professional development, and I can tell you, Jesse, you won't believe this, but I worked in a school once, elementary school. And this was in 2008, 2009. Do you know, we had, I think, 11 professional development sessions between the start of the school year and November. And do you know all of them were different? I don't know to this day that our school administration realized that she had 11 different professional developments. And so, and they all focused on doing something to improve. Well, even if you do see improvement of the 11 professional developments, which one was it that did the trick? And I don't think she realized that. And I don't think you have administrators who understand you can't provide one training in something one day, and then the next month you provide another type of training in something else. No, you've got to find that path and stick with it. But then the other problem, Jesse, is when you come back the next school year, how many of those school administrators have changed the agenda again?
It's teachers that are leaving the profession, and they're leaving the profession in greater numbers than ever before.
They are.
Complain that nothing is ever taken off their plate. There's always something new on the plate, and it's almost as if they have no time to keep up. So it's that alphabet soup, it's other things, and also a lot of the selling points are you've been doing it wrong. So if you send me to, and if you I'm an old football player. So if you sent me into the game and you gave me bad shoulder pads, a cracked helmet, and you gave me cleats that weren't working, and by the way, the football was deflated, and you said, go play the game. I mean, this is what our DSAP teachers are facing.
Right.
They are facing being sent into the game, because we want to also remember at the heart of DSAP teachers is the desire to make a difference in the life of our children. And they believe that that's what America wants. And I'll say it again, America spends $23 billion every year more on predominantly white wealthy schools than it does on black and brown poor schools. That's the nature. 23 billion. That would be, I could turn around, give every state, say, hey, could you use $500 million? Could you use $500 million to reduce class size, to add specialized, personnel, speech pathologists, school psychologists, special education teachers, literacy specialists? How about I give you 500 million and I say to, especially our priority school district, we only have 19 in Connecticut, 19 sharing $500 million. I wonder what that would be. But we have decided we want to remember, and that's something I know people don't like to hear it, but that $23 billion more spent annually is evidence of a systemic structural racism that has harmed the futures of Black and Brown and special education children for not just a decade, but for the whole 170 plus years. So, but all right, let's come back to, let's think about some other components. So I know we talked about the problem, we've got that, but tell me something about your great teachers, the ones that somehow don't realize they're being abused, they're being beat up, and they come in every week, because I have them in my classes. They come in and I listen to the stuff, and somehow they have a smile on their face, and they say, do you know what, today, you know, just like that little kid who read the book in Spanish who they thought was a non-reader. That teacher told me, Dr. Turner, get your camera out and film that right now. You know, so tell us, do you have students like that? Some of these DSAPs, because we've been saying least qualified, but I also think that maybe they're the least qualified, but maybe.
But they have hearts as big as the sun.
Well, I love that, because that matters.
Yes. And, you know, at the end of the day, even teachers who don't know what they're doing, because I was that teacher for years. Like I said, I was hired that way. But my students recognize my heart. And there was a level of respect that I received from them, because they knew, wow, you actually care. You stay. That was the big thing. You're here again. Like, we didn't think you were coming back. I have a teacher now who, when I tell you, she was completing an assignment for a student. And this young lady, the little girl, I'm not sure what happened to her mom, but she's living with her father, single parent. And she comes into school, and oftentimes her hair is not done, and her clothes aren't clean. And this particular teacher was able to find out from the student what was going on with their hair, what was it? Basically, she's in a single parent household and dad works all the time. So these teachers combed out her hair because it was matted, combed her hair out, washed her clothes, and every week, 1 to 2 times a week, they know that if she's gonna have clean clothes, it's because they're gonna help. If she's gonna get her hair done, it's because they're gonna help. And guess what? It is 2024, and this is the teacher. But when I was teaching back in 2000, we had a student who came to school, and we figured out that her hair was never done. What we found out was that when her hair was done, she was well behaved. And so every day she came home, came into school, the assistant principal would pull her in, she would brush her hair, give her a nice hairstyle first thing in the morning, and then send her to class. And so the one thing we do have, when you go to the urban school, the one thing we do have are teachers with the biggest hearts. The challenge, though, is even though I love teaching, I've done hair, I've brought in food and clothes. If you're a teacher and you've been in it for a while, you've done it too. But I got tired. I mean, I didn't know exactly what I was doing. And so at the end of the day, love, that connection, it bridges the gap and gives children the hope that they need. It gives them a safe place to be. Sometimes home is the least safe. And that's something, you know, you talked about earlier when you were saying that you love school because it was a safe space. I know for me, I loved it because I was going to get a meal there. It was safe and I was going to get a meal. But even with all that, there's a need for continued academic growth. Now, for me, and you and I have talked about this, Jesse, I grew up attending an urban school in North Carolina. I think probably one of the largest school districts in North Carolina where I grew up. And do you remember back in the day, they used to track us? They used to have the high performing classes, the average classes, and the low performing. I was always in the low performing classes. And so I didn't get, and to add to that, I was a student with a learning disability placed into special education when special education first began. So it was very clumsy kind of learning that I had. But guess what? And I've said this before, for any parent who is listening and who is terrified because you're hearing that, oh my God, my child is in one of these school districts with these teachers who aren't qualified, I gotta say two things to you. One, your child is probably loved more because all too often, when we come in, that's all we have, a passion to serve and a heart to love. But the second thing I want to say to parents is the biggest difference in my life was my mother. School was a kind of a safe place where I got food, but when it came to education, it was an urban school district. And I was a low performing student. And so the quality of education that I received wasn't great, but my mother's expectations, she didn't care. I don't care what the problem is. Her expectations hovered up here and they never went down. And so, but my mother was the one who bought the books. And she made sure we saw the closest we were going to see to ourselves, because back then I don't remember a book with Black and brown people in it. But my mother's expectations, her requirement that we learn and get involved in the community, that's what made the biggest difference for me. Because I know I can say I did not get the best quality education. But having someone at home say, I'm going to support you, I'm going to get you those books, I'm going to take you to museums, I'm going to take you to all these places that you need to see, and I'm going to show you a better life, because at the end of the day, my mother wanted us to have a better life than she did. So she exposed us to everything that she believed would give us that best start. So let me tell you, at the end of the day, I'll tell any parent, and I was the same way. I trusted the school system to do its job, but not the job. And I hope you hear the difference. The school district does its job, not the job. And the job is to raise up a whole person who's going to become an American citizen who you want to be able to thrive. And if you are a parent who actually wants that, then you're going to have to play your role. And I say this because the number of voices and messages that we in education have been riddled with, I mean, they won't stop. The crazy part is they have a lot to say, but they won't show up to help. Have you noticed that? Like, everybody has an opinion, but nobody seems to want to show up and say, let me do my part.
That may be the part. So when we're always one of the toughest things to be a teacher in a poor community. Yes, my students don't have the resources that wealthy families have. We could do the same. I could look at, I was a homeless kid, talk about teachers that made a difference when we used to have to bring our own lunch to school because there was no free lunches in my day. And Mr. Bass quickly learned that I had no lunch. And he learned it because I hate lunch, and punch a couple of kids or something silly and stupid.
Wow. Yeah,
and he
yeah.
saw through that. And so Mr. Bass started bringing 2 liverwish sandwiches because he knew I like liverwish, or I said I did somewhere. And this is his kid watching stuff, because
Yeah.
those teachers that love do more than just love. They're
Yeah.
kid watchers. And he watched
Yeah.
and he saw it through my tough bullying kind of thing and saying I hate this. And so he fed me lunch for a year. That's a different
That's, yeah.
love. And every day bringing it in, all that stuff. But I'm just saying, so those are some of our DSAP teachers bring this with us. But I do want to address the idea is what do we call an education reform that's supposed to improve education, that doesn't provide teachers with the resources they need to be successful, doesn't provide them with the professional development to be successful? What do we call education reform that tells those DSAP teachers, by the way, you're going to be underpaid, we're going to throw you in the midst of battle, and by the way, you have to pay for a master's degree for yourself to get that certification? So what do we call that kind of reform?
We call it what it is. Anyone who has followed educational reforms for decades know that none of those reforms have ever reformed anything. They've never actually worked. And for all the reasons you pretty much pointed out. You want reform, you want change, but you won't invest in it. Stop and think about that. You recognize that there's a problem. You recognize the resources necessary to change the problem, but you won't invest in any of that. I don't think that's reform. I don't know what that is.
That's a scam. That's a scam. That's what I
There you
tell
go.
people.
That's a scam.
And we must be honest. Education reform is a big moneymaker. So
Oh,
if I
yes,
looked at
yes.
from 2000, when President George Bush introduced No Child Left Behind, we quickly found that if you wanted to, while the stock market in those days was struggling, and we would run in by the end into a financial crisis, the one stock that you could invest in was Pearson. That was the high stakes test, because George Bush turned education reform from doing something for children, helping schools, and I don't want to really be critical, but it is that he turned it into testing will bring equity and save our children. So, and I want to bring us to this point. What do I tell my Black parents and my brown parents and parents in school districts that when Connecticut says 54% of our children in the third grade are now underperforming, not performing at level? What do we tell them for that? Because that's we had a show in the fall with Randy Watson, a friend of mine. He runs a Black veterans group, and he's a grandparent now in Manchester. And he's like, what are you telling me? Oh, only 35-40% of the students in Manchester, Black students, are reading at grade level. This has got to be a crisis. Why aren't we blowing up this stuff? So what does that mean? I know it's bigger. It's like asking you for the meaning of life.
Right now, I think when you see, and I want to make sure that people understand what you were just saying, listeners understand. When you say 54% of our third graders are below grade level, that means children right now throughout the state of Connecticut are sitting in the third grade and they're learning. And at the end of the year, they're going to take a test to see, did you learn everything that you should learn in the third grade? And when they take that test, at least last year, when they took that test, they did the same thing. They sat through the third grade, learned every day, got to the end of the year, took the test, and the test showed that, only, 46% of the third graders who took that test are actually testing, saying that everything you taught me this year, got it. I'm ready for fourth grade. The scary part here, though, Jesse, is, like I know, those students, and you've said this before, by the time those test results come back, they come back in the fall. So those, 54% of students who could not perform on the third grade, they're already in the fourth grade by the time you find out. They're in the fourth grade.
And they're behind in the fourth, behind in the fifth. The research shows that the children that are behind in the first grade are behind in the 12th grade. And it's the opportunity that I engage with people. I say, well, we're focused on the wrong assessments. One, so SBAC is not a diagnostic assessment, no matter what they say. Smarter balance. Well, there's no balance in it. It's not smarter. It doesn't measure what's been taught. It measures a standard that's arbitrary, been set outside the school district. But to come back to this, and if I look at the data trend for them, I study these data trends. Those numbers have not changed in 50 years. Okay, so it's always 54%. But if it's a crisis, and this is my argument with the state's mandate on literacy and the $100 million for the reading curriculum. Reading curriculums, in boxes and saying we're going to do the science of reading. My real argument is we need teachers. We need special education teachers. I haven't even talked about the state is about to lay off over 1,000 teachers.
Now, what they did, they found some money to buy them one more year.
All right.
Not all of them. But what happened was all of the money that came through the relief fund, through Biden's relief fund, they brought in all of these special teachers to try to get the students back up on par. And you see how well that went, but that's not the point. But they brought them in, paid them, but now that the money's gone, they're sending these people away. So to your point, they're getting rid of thousands of teachers in the neediest school districts. So they managed to scrape together some money to save some of the teachers, but next year they're going to be in the same spot. So anybody who is working in the school system and your job was on the line, you got a year, but you're going to be in the same space next year. Which brings me to the issue that you brought up. It baffles my mind how you could be so desperate for teachers and force them to pay for their own master's degree. They have to have a master's degree. And you force them to pay for it, but you're the desperate one. I don't understand that either. So this whole thing around reform, around needing teachers and how desperate we are to improve the qualities, are we really doing that? This is why I go back to parents. Because I know that the school system is in a position where we can't, this stuff is not going to be fixed right away. It's going to take years and it's going to take dedication. My biggest concern is I don't want any parent out here waiting for that to happen. I need every single parent to understand that you can't afford to wait. Your child cannot afford to wait. And so very simply, for parents, we can't seem to get the reform right right now, but Jesse and I aren't in control. So there you go. But you can take your children to the grocery store with you, have them write the list of food out and actually go down the aisle. They can practice reading. They can practice math. They can practice decimals and fractions. They can practice all of these things if you take them out. So often parents leave children at home and say, okay, you stay here, let me get a babysitter and let me go out. Can you imagine as a parent, and we used to do this all the time. My husband and I were broke as church mice, but we would take our sons to the bookstore and we would just sit down and read the books. We couldn't afford them, but we could afford to go in and sit on the floor and read them. We couldn't afford the toys in Toys R Us, but we would go in and read the stories and see what would they like for Christmas. We would take them places and expose them to things that we knew when they became adults, they would need to know. And so I'm praying that for parents who are listening, that you take control while we try to get this thing together. And try to make
to get it together.
Right.
And I've been saying, so I'm a pretty church-based kid, and I've been praying my whole life. But I also know something. There comes a time for doing. So we're getting down to the last minutes of our I'll show today. I'm going to tell you something that I want to do. I want to create a think tank for equity in Connecticut. I want to reach out to Reverend Barber, who is now at the Divinity School in New Haven. I want to reach out to our Black and Latino caucus members. In this district that we're in is an exceptional lawmaker, Gary Winfield, Senator Winfield. I want to reach out to them. I've had so many guests on the shows that have talked about this, but it comes to time that we need a literacy think tank that testifies before legislators to let them know, listen, you need to invest in those teachers that you want to teach, those teachers that bring the love. You need to fight to keep them in those schools. You need to pay them well. You need to give them benefits. You need, and if we do this, because Texas is a state that says they measure how many new prisons they build by the 3rd grade reading scores.
Yep.
So if you want to, Horace Mann said, open a school or open schools today, public schools today rather than, or prisons tomorrow. We make the choice. So Connecticut, we can do that. So one of my solutions is to create an equity think tank so that our parents, our legislators, our educators understand that we're not being given real solutions. We're being given smoke and mirrors, and while well-intentioned, they're not there. So do you have a solution? One idea that you can share? Because we're going to run. Harry's going to start saying he's going to play the music. So when the music starts, that's the show. It's like he's telling us. He said, "Shut up, Jesse. The show's over." Okay.
Okay. So really quickly, I've already told parents, hey, be on the lookout. But for teachers, I want teachers to know that you do hear all of these alphabets, you hear all of these different program initiatives, but for your own sanity, please know that all of those are the same. They go by different names, but they are the same. And they all boil down to learning how to differentiate. Okay, that's it.
Thank you, Dr. Christina. Christian.
Thank you.
As I got another rhyme, another rhythm for y'all to listen. I'm never quitting on my mission. I'ma roll with what I'm giving. Got some ambition, this new edition, filling positions. Looking at the void in myself and feeling what's missing. Better watch the way you going, better go in the right direction. In the moment you stressing, but you gon' be counting blessings. And I know that for certain. Keep on working, open curtains. Haters swerving, cause they ain't ready for your final version. Whoa. I'm never gonna give up. Fall down, I just gotta get up, yeah. Cause this is my road. Let's camera action.
You're listening to the Tom Ficklin Show on WNHHLP 103.5 SM, your home for community radio.